Welcome back, Notcasters. Well, actually, you're not a Notcaster. You're a Notcast watcher, and there's not that many of you, so I could probably name each of you individually. But hello, it is Friday, 19th of May, 2023, and this is number 290 or whatever number it is. I was going to talk today about the Smiths' Meat is Murder album, which I'd had planned for last night, but then I decided that sitting on my sofa was far more comfortable. I wrote about something for an upcoming Pink Floyd book instead. I was going to talk about Meat is Murder, but I woke up this morning and there was a text message. It's normally how you find out. You wake up, you get a text message in the morning, somebody's died. And Andy Rourke, bass player of the Smiths, and also with Solo Morrissey in the early years, Sinead O'Connor, Badly Drawn Boy, Freebase, and other acts, had died of pancreatic cancer recently, aged 59, which to me seems far too young. But then I now think of middle age as being something around about 50, as opposed to being something around about 27. When I was younger, the idea of somebody being 59, I was like, they're dead and their back hurts and they're tired and old. So the concept of age has changed. And obviously when the Smiths split up, which was 36 years ago now, Andy was only 23. That's very young age to have achieved so much. So the idea that he's dead, the first of the gang to die, is pretty strange and utterly unexpected. I saw him play live twice, once with Badly Drawn Boy in Chicago, and then later on at the Leeds Cliff Hall in Folkestone as a member of Ian Brown's band. Folkestone is notorious for having rough gigs and rough crowds. Of the, I think, 4 shows I've seen there, 2 have been delayed because of fighting. One was Ian Brown and the other one was editors. And so I've decided not to go to shows at the Leeds Cliff Hall anymore. I did make another trek to see Frank Turner. That was quite nice. And then about 10 years before that, Ozzy Osbourne, which was quite nice. But I've decided that generally, as a venue, it's a poor experience, Folkestone. And what a shame to have a show ruined by a great big scrap in the audience, to put it bluntly. With normal transmission, kind of carrying on, I was going to talk about the Smiths' second or third or second and a half, depending on your point of view, studio album, released in February 1985, Meat is Murder. And I'm going to do a chronological run through this album and some of the stuff that's in there. And by the way, I am going to talk about bass lines, because it has some of the best bass lines in the entire of the Smiths' career. It really, really does. And of course, the most obvious bass line, the one that most people remember most immediately, is the one for Barbarism Begins at Home, which was the first bit of music that was heard from the album. 3 songs from the album were played live before the album had been released, which means 6 of the songs nobody had heard before they put the record on the platter or the cassette inside their mini. And the first of the tracks to be played live, I think, was Barbarism Begins at Home, this one here, first premiered in December 1983. And it's not at all an expected move. It's a song that has possibly one of the best bass lines of all time, certainly at least as good as White Lines Don't Do It, and of course anything else by Chic, including of course You Can't Touch This, is one of the finest bass lines of all time. And this was the first release which people heard from it, although it wasn't officially released. There was DJ Promo 12-inch, which was limited to 500 copies. This is one of those 12 inches. There's the sleeve tells you it's a DJ copy, not for sale. A side, single-sided. B side is blank. I think it's probably worth quite a bit of money now. I must admit, when I was buying records, I wasn't thinking about, well, how much is it worth, or how much is it going to be worth in 2023? I was thinking, well, what's it worth to me? How much does this record mean to me? Because that's the criteria by which you should buy music. You shouldn't be buying music on the criteria of, that's a rarity, that's going to be worth a bit. You should buy music on the grounds of, I love it, it means something to me. And Barbarism Begins at Home. I got a job lot of Smiths 12 inches, Morrissey 12 inches, and vinyl and LPs and bootlegs and things like that, and singles in about 2001, 2002. I was working at a very big company that effectively had a marketplace, and one of the guys that worked there put up that, oh yeah, I've got loads of Morrissey and Smith stuff and I'd like to sell it for £150. And I looked at it and went, I'd quite like to buy all of that for £150. That looks really good value. So I got about 200 albums in 12 inches and 7-inch singles in a job lot all in one go, which was a very impressive haul actually. And then I sold off my duplicates for about £200. So effectively I made 50 quid on the deal as well. Barbarism Begins at Home, first played live in December 1983. And it was in various live forms. The band played it live a lot, so in 1984, 1985, and sometimes versions of it went up to 15 minutes, I believe, though I've never actually listened to the bootleg recordings of the song that go on for that long. And it's, I think, a pivotal song in the band's career. It's the longest Smiths track, it's the longest recorded studio Smiths material. And whilst it's Johnny Marr's least favourite Smith song, because it has been played live a lot and sometimes went on very, very long, it's a great song that betrays none of that when you listen to it. Also, of course, when you think about other lesser Smith songs, such as I'd Keep Mine Hidden, for example, you then kind of go, what was it about Barbarism Begins at Home that was imperfect? I don't know. I really don't. But it's for me, it's an absolute classic song, and it ties in with, I think, some of the themes which run all through the Meat Is Murder album like a stick of rock. Before the album was released, keen-eared listeners to the Smiths will also have heard a couple of songs on the 1984 Peel sessions with the songs Rusholme Ruffians and Nowhere Fast. That were played on John Peel alongside William It Was Really Nothing, and I think an alternate mix of How Soon Is Now. These two tracks, Nowhere Fast and Rusholme Ruffians, were released on the CD single. Here it is, of Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me, the last and final Smiths song, or the last and final Smiths single. And Rusholme Ruffians and Nowhere Fast, effectively Peel sessions, were in the studio demos that were broadcast on the radio. The band were familiar with the songs. They played them, they got paid to play them, and they had demo versions. They were able to try out the songs in the studio without having to pay for demo time. So if you have Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Really Loved Me, the final Smith single, then you have those early Peel sessions, and they're fascinating alternate versions. There were also in the sessions for William I Was Really Nothing, which also had featured How Soon Is Now and Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want. Early studio versions of Nowhere Fast and Rusholme Ruffians were recorded. So those songs were played before the album was released. People had heard them alongside Barbarism Begins at Home. There was also the song The Headmaster Ritual, which had been demoed in summer 1983 or written in summer 1983, but not played live before the album came out. This album, Meat Is Murder, according to Morris's autobiography, the first studio album from a Manchester band that made #1 in the UK pop charts. Also, I think the song that inspired the song You Just Haven't Heard It Yet, Baby, on the grounds that there was promotion around that. Now, the cover image there, Meat Is Murder, has been manipulated. If you can see, that's Morris's handwriting there saying Meat Is Murder. Originally, it was from a documentary in 1969 called In the Year of the Pig, around the Vietnamese War, and it said Make Love, Not War, which was, or Make War, Not Love, sorry, I should remember my facts correctly, which was then changed to Meat Is Murder. This was the time where I think Rough Trade as a label started to drift away a little bit from the band. They started to think about the band in a different context, as opposed to thinking of them as perhaps their star players. And it was an unusual time, I think, to be a fan of the band. The band had a UK #1 chart hit. And at the same point, they were just 2 years later, they were releasing an LP called The World Won't Listen. And you kind of just sat there and going, really? That's what you think? It's perhaps a strange period of time. Also, lyrically, by the way, the album has a huge shift in its lyrical concept. So it's from autobiographical and being, desperately single to almost observational. And most of the songs have, at least as a theme in it, something around both institutionalised and personal violence. So experience of violence as an individual, from the Headmaster Ritual, where Morris's lyric is very much around, what does he say? Thwacks you on the knees you in the groin, elbow in the face, bruises as big as dinner plates, to Rusholme Ruffians, which of course has the opening line, the last night of the fair by the big wheel generator, a boy is stabbed and his money is grabbed, and the air hangs heavy like a dulling wine. And then later on into Barbarism Begins at Home, with its lyric around a crack on the head is what you get for not asking, and a crack on the head is what you get for asking. And of course, meat is murder, around closer comes the screaming knife, this beautiful creature must die. These songs are at least very finely focused on violence on both the personal and political and institutional and corporate perspectives. We start off for track one, side one, the Headmaster Ritual, which is effectively answered later on by Morrissey in his career with the Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils from 1995 Southpaw Grammar, 10 years later. It's a very curious song that doesn't address some of the key, or more correctly, it's a very curious song that addresses something that nobody really talks about in culture, and that is what's the experience of growing up in a British comprehensive school. I am the product of a British comprehensive school. I hated every second of being at school. It felt like I had been put in a prison, even though I had committed no crime and I had no opportunity of parole. I mean, if you have a job, you can leave. If you have, if you have a relationship, you can split up with them. If you have a school, that's it. You're there for the next 5 years. The concept of refusal, years of refusal in a school hadn't occurred to me. I really wish it had. I hated the school I was in, and by the sounds of every line on this album, so did Morrissey. British comprehensive schools in the 80s were exam factories. We were meat thrown into a grinder and chucked out the other end. We had information and facts thrown at us like we were just buckets that they could pour information into so they could pass exams, so they could then get the requisite marks so that they could still have their jobs. And I wasn't given any of the tools to live my life. I wasn't given any of the tools around ethics in personal behaviour, how to manage a gas bill, expectations around a relationship, things like, well, you shouldn't cheat on people, for example. That wasn't something that they ever talked about at school. They never talked about that. They talked about sticking a condom on a banana and saying, well, that's sex education. And it was a deeply unhappy period for me, being 12, 13, 14 in a British comprehensive in 1985. I despised it. I was surrounded by people that I knew only because they, like I, were victims of proximity and geography. These, the vast majority of people at my school were people I had nothing in common with whatsoever. I had no interest in their sports, no interest in their parochial Little England nationalism. I had no interest in being particularly proud of coming from Birmingham. I wasn't interested in any of that. The way that they exerted power over other people was through physical violence, through bullying. It was fucking shit, and I hated it. I really, really did. And I wish I'd had the confidence to think about just blatant refusal of participation in that, and to go, no, this school is not working for me at all. And I suspect that's a very common experience. Going to a British comprehensive is that you're forced into a situation that you didn't ask for, don't want, and can't leave, and that you have to serve a 5-year sentence there, sitting in a uniform, being taught how to think and what to think and how to feel, if you have any feelings at all. And violence was endemic in my school, and it probably was in many other schools. It certainly was in the one that's on this particular record. Except the violence that's in Meat is Murder is very specifically coming from teachers towards the pupils. That opening line about belligerent schools, Manchester schools, spineless swines, cemented minds, and you kind of go, well, so I mean, I had board rubbers thrown at me. I saw acts of violence by teachers. I saw people that were caned. I knew that there was physical discipline that was dispensed. Adults hitting children in order to get them to behave and conform. Children that had their hands tied behind their back so that they wouldn't write left-handed. The idea of having ideas or concepts was ridiculous. You were taught, this is the way the world is. This is how you must think. This is what you must do. You are a object to have information poured into you so that you have just enough education to perform, and that you have the tools in order to be a useful little worker bee. And there has spineless swines with cemented minds, and they kind of directed the children into almost an abattoir of thought. And then there's this, the line in the Headmaster Ritual, I want to go home, I don't want to stay, give up education as a bad mistake. That's how I felt. I was like, I don't belong here. I'm surrounded by people I don't know, don't like, don't trust, don't have anything in common with, and I can't escape. And I hadn't even done anything, I had not committed a crime apart from breathing and being in possession of a bad haircut in 1983. So it didn't make any sense to me. And then there's that line about he grabs and devours, he kicks me in the showers, and I want to go home, I don't want to stay. I wasn't particularly physical. I was pretty rubbish at PE. I wore glasses, so I was terrible at football, terrible at rugby, terrible at physical sports. So I didn't do any sport that involved a shower. And I think I'm very, very lucky in that respect, but I shouldn't count myself to be lucky to have avoided, being attacked in the shower by other children. And if you want to think about, autism, and people do, and there's a lot of dialogue around autism in society at the moment, but one of the key factors about autism is actually it's always been there. People have just been hiding it because they don't trust the people around them, and they don't trust that they can be honest to the people around them. So it's always there. And by the way, the quickest way you want to find out if a kid's autistic is find out if he's being bullied, because bullies are hone in on people with slightly different personalities, and then try and even the scales a little bit. I was bullied as a kid. I remember all of them. I remember every name. And I know that one of them died of cancer at the age of 17, which could have happened to a nicer person. I think another one died in a car crash, about roughly the same age. I was not heartbroken by that at all. Some of them are still around. I don't care. In fact, the last time I saw one of them was on a Sunday morning, and he was a butcher selling, lumps of meat with, a little head mic out of the back of a van somewhere in Birmingham, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And I was just like, it's him, isn't it? It's that kid. And I was like, yeah, we've grown apart, is the nice way to put it. It's about, this song is around the memory of a school, and the school as a machine that flattens souls and packages them into boxes so they can fit through certain lifestyles. They don't want people that are weird or different. They want us to be all the same, think all the same, and they don't want us to think for themselves. Exterminate all rational thought, as William Burroughs has it. Now, somewhat curiously, the Headmaster Ritual did get a release as a single in Holland, one of my favourite countries. Here is the Dutch 12-inch of the Headmaster Ritual, which was released late in 1985. Here was an import version on Megadisc Records. It was a Headmaster Ritual backed with 4 live songs recorded in Oxford on Megadisc. I don't know how much this is worth. This photograph, I think, is taken from... I can't remember. I wrote it down somewhere, but I can't remember where it's from. Taken from some obscure documentary, because most of the Smiths covers were made from obscure documentary. When you think about Smiths covers, and as I mentioned this before, each one of them is like a sepia-tinted alternate version of a reality that once existed, presented in black and whites and kind of tan and greens and those types of things, about people in situations where somehow they don't quite belong into whatever it is there is. Think about, for example, of the simmering glamour here from the cover of Shakespeares Sister. And it's just people in situations that feel like a reality that once existed, almost historical documents. So by taking out all of the contemporary references in the covers, Smith's songs then kind of became timeless as opposed to of a particular time. You think about the cover of, let's say, Spandau Ballet LP. I do not like Spandau Ballet at all. And then you see the imagery that you've got on that, and you can almost pinpoint the exact week in June 1983 that particular record was designed. Whereas with Smith's covers, this could have been 1958, 1988. As it happened, the Headmaster Ritual was 1985, and there is the Dutch 12-inch. There was also a limited edition CD single of the Headmaster Ritual that was released in 1988. I have that, Rough Trade 215, by the way. This features a photograph of Viv Nicholson, who will appear on other releases. 4,766 copies of this were pressed, and most of them were withdrawn. They'd asked Viv Nicholson previously for permission to use her photograph on the cover of various releases. She had said yes to Barbarism Begins at Home. She had said yes to Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now. She objected to the Headmaster Ritual on CD because it contains the line Spineless Bastards. And as a Jehovah's Witness, that was not cohesive with her religious beliefs. So they received a harsh letter after pressing up 4,766 copies and withdrew and destroyed most of them. And I think got away with it. Although getting away with it is probably the nice way of describing it. The press run for this was relatively small, and the interest was pretty low. It didn't chart in 1988 when it got a CD single release. So the CD single is backed with Nowhere Fast, Stretch Out and Wait, and Meat is Murder. Whereas the 12-inch also includes Shakespeare's Sister from the show in Oxford. The second track on the album is Rusholme Ruffians, and as previously mentioned, Rusholme Ruffians is was played at a Peel session in 1984. Rusholme Ruffians is the second song that details violence, this time inter-youth violence, so violence between children or kids of roughly the same age, the kind of people that you would see on the cover of The World Won't Listen in the background, those boys standing there in a gang outside. There's an element of discussion around fairgrounds. So fairgrounds, you probably know what those are. It's almost a world of others. It's a place where you can go and pretend to be not yourself for a period of time and hang around with kids and all that type of stuff. I've never been to a fairground. I've never seen the appeal of them, ever. And people that go to fairgrounds are probably the children that fit in and belong and hang around in gangs together, not the type of people that probably sat at home and listened to Smith's records. There's a version of this on the live album Rank that is a medley with Elvis Presley's Marie's The Name, His Latest Flame. And it's around institutionalised violence, a lot of these songs, in the home, in school, in society, and in the meat industry. The concept of us, human beings, being the meat, processed through a grinder, turned into happy little worker bees or hamburgers at the end of it. We're trapped by geography and circumstance, and whilst you can't leave school, you can leave a job, and you can make a voluntary decision to not go to the fairgrounds. So the fairgrounds is a world, in the context of this song, that's scary and dangerous. It's full of kids that are bigger than you, more violent than you. They have knives and they can stab you, and they have elements of that goes in there. It's on the cusp between youth and adulthood. There's a line about an engagement ring doesn't mean a thing to a mind consumed by brass brackets money. The idea that it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that bling. So what matters is that you have a wedding ring, you have a somebody's made the commitment that they want to be with you, and you're starting to get what people regard to be the material markers of a successful life. So a wife, a house, a car, a kid, a dog or a cat, probably a cat knowing Morrissey, those type of things. And then you're going, well, actually, if you're not, then you're going to pretend to have those things. So you'd buy rings because you want to wear a ring. I don't quite know why. You have a car. It's not a great car. You get a flat because you can't really afford a house. You go out with somebody, and when you're younger, you go out with somebody because you want to go out with somebody, not because that's somebody you want to go out with. Sometimes I've been guilty of that, although not for very long. And I think about in culture, certainly in American culture, there's that cliche of a husband hating his wife That being, like the Addams Family, by the way, the Addams Family, where Gomez is absolutely besotted by, I think it's Selena and his wife, and the idea is actually that's a complete parody and inversion of a standard American family. The idea that in a standard American family, the guy hates his wife, resents her existence, thinks he's trapped by his children, and can't understand how he got to that point. And I'm kind of going, why would you ever get to that point? I understand that as time goes on and you've got commitment bias, it becomes harder and harder to live separately or whatever. But if you make the right decision at the right time, you don't marry somebody that you end up hating. I think about some people that I went to school with that got pregnant at 16 or 20 or something, and they're now grandparents, and I'm at the point where I'm kind of going, really, that seems very fast and very soon. And there's an element of almost thinking, maybe you're kind of regretting the decision that you made at that point because you were 20 or 21 or 22 and you made a decision to be with somebody for the rest of your life, and you're like, the first frog that you kissed turned out to be the princess. I mean, on one respect, yeah, very lucky, but on the other hand, you just kind of think, well, couldn't you have been a bit fussier, a bit choosier? If the first card that you pick is the one that wins the bingo, that's luck. But at the same point, you're kind of going, well, I'll just go out with somebody, which is a nice way of saying I'm quite judgmental, which you've probably worked out already, because you don't get to nearly 300 episodes of me talking about my record collection without being at least judgmental in some respects. So Rusholme Ruffians, again, a song about violence, this time between teenagers with each other, people and kids bullying each other. The Headmaster Ritual, about the violence of the teachers bullying the pupils and violence on an institutionalised level. And we have track 3 is the, I think, probably Morris's worst vocal during the Smiths, previously known as the fast one. This is I Want the One I Can't Have. The vocals are a little bit off key, they're a little bit abrasive, they don't sit completely comfortably on the song itself. I mean, there's some great lines in here: a double bed and a stalwart lover for sure, these are the riches of the poor. The idea that actually all you need is a double bed, and you've got the double bed of dreams, two people, two lovers, drifters off to see the world, not so sure that the world needs them, fighting against that. And then there's a lyric in there, he killed a policeman when he was 13, and somehow that really impressed me. Is again around a degree of validation, hardness, being one of the hard kids as a way of gaining a form of self-validation. Which, by the way, if you ever need self-validation, meet me in the alley by the railway station. As the last lyric on I Want the One I Can't Have says, is an album that's very, not adolescent, but it very much understands and articulates the lack of certainty around identity and agency that you have when you're a teenager. Track 4 is What She Said. Is very influenced by a poem called By Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept, which is also quoted in the track Well I Wonder as well. It also has the nearest thing that we've got, aside from the intro to The Queen Is Dead, to a drum solo, which is that huge crescendo at the end of What She Said. And there's this lovely sly line in there around, I smoke because I'm hoping for an early death and I need to cling to something. And it's funny. People forget how funny the Smiths are, because that is a fucking hilarious lyric. And not enough people really fully grasp how funny the Smiths actually were. There's this dark humour, laughing in the face of death at the end of it. Track 5 is That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which was released as a single. It got to number 49 in the UK pop charts, although it was released in July 1985, several months after the album came out in February, and had no new studio tracks on it. So That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. No wonder it only got to number 49, because I was a music fan. I buy music for the music I haven't heard. So I buy singles for the B-sides, or if the A-side hasn't been released before, for the A-sides. I don't buy it to get a copy of the LP mix that plays at 45 instead of 33. That's not the kind of guy that I am. So That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which takes its cover photograph from a very, very small kind of photo of an Italian child actor from something, hence why it looks so very obviously newsprint there and was then blown up to be a much, much bigger kind of stage prop. This made it to the grand old number of number 49 in the UK pop charts. So, somebody at the door, which sounds like a kid's TV show, doesn't it? And so that joke isn't funny anymore, by the way. Did have, I think it's got some copies of it had an inner sleeve which detailed the Smiths discography. My copy doesn't, because that's not the version that I bought way back in 1991. But there you are, and it's backed with 4 live tracks recorded at the Oxford Apollo on the 18th of March 1985. These being Nowhere Fast, Stretch Out and Wait, Shakespeare's Sister, and Meat is Murder. There were thoughts about doing a Meat is Murder live EP. A test pressing 7-inch was produced. A chap I know, Brian, did have a copy, then sold it for about £100, I think, which is probably a bargain. And I think I need the £100 more than I need the Smiths record, which is probably true right now. If any of you want to offer me £100 for any of the records which I'm talking about, I'll have to check against Discogs what the value of them might be, but you might be able to get it. Who knows? But that joke isn't funny anymore. Got to number 49 in the UK charts. It was a song that addressed an allegedly intimate relationship that had been rumoured to exist in the press between Morrissey and somebody else. But there's an element of talking about, well, actually, I am not public property. An element that if you become famous, people automatically have assumptions and ideas around you. They think that they own the right to information about you that they probably shouldn't. They think that they have the right to know about, well, who you're having sex with, if you're having sex with anybody, and whether that person meets with your approval or not. That behaviour is a little intrusive and a little ghoulish, and it doesn't work for me at all. So that song, I think, seemed to be a little bit clearer around kind of setting some boundaries around a personal life. So it says, for example, there's a line in here around it suddenly struck me, I just might die with a smile on my face after all. Again, people don't realise how bloody funny the Smiths were. Hilarious in many ways. Take over to side 2, we go to Nowhere Fast. And as I said before, Nowhere Fast was played on the Peel session in 1984. So if you want to get an alternate version of Nowhere Fast, get it on that. I think that's one of the very few Smith songs that isn't on an album, actually, the Peel session performances of Nowhere Fast. But it opens with that lovely line, I'd like to drop my trousers to the world, and then I'd like to drop my trousers to the Queen. Every sensible child will know what that means. When I was 13 or 14, nobody was really talking in a subversive way about royalty, monarchy, politicians in any way. The cultural conversation was a very narrow discourse that went through a set of gatekeepers. So if you wanted to put out a public an opinion and say, well, actually, I think the Queen is a load of old bunk, for example, you'd have to have a newspaper sub-editor that would publish that, or there'd have to be a political action group that would lobby people or pay for adverts and fundraise and do those type of things. Nowadays, of course, you can just go on Twitter and tell everybody what you think, because that's how Twitter works. It doesn't necessarily mean you actually think anything, and if you can't think, it doesn't stop you from being on Twitter, as certain pundits recognise. But that idea of there are certain sacred cows that you couldn't approach, talk about, or question, and one of those was the existence of the monarchy and the royalty. To me, a royal family is morally indefensible in every way, shape and form. I don't understand how someone could sit there and think that a family should experience colossal wealth, power and influence and be exempt from the law just because of their bloodline. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. It seems to be, an inherent structural failing that creates gods and masters over serfs and peons. And I'm a citizen, not a subject. I don't exist at His Majesty's pleasure, absolutely not. I don't need his permission, and I don't care. And frankly, I've been particularly baffled this month by the coronation of King Charles and the Queen Consort, or whatever her title is this week. The mass obligatory kind of mourning which has happened following the death of the Queen last year. I'm just baffled by the existence of the royals completely. I just sit there and go, you look ridiculous. It's pomp, it's circumstance, it's expensive, it's nonsense. One of the traditional failings of any nation, if you look at kind of like some of the hallmarks of, for example, fascism, repressionism, or kind of like declining position on the world stage, nationalism, and kind of like a love of the monarchy, clinging to the flag and pomp and circumstances, always one of the first hallmarks of it, actually, because if you've got to wave a flag and tell everybody where you came from probably isn't that great. You know, the less you have to wave a flag and tell everyone that you have come from Britain, the more likely it is that Britain's actually pretty amazing. You know, there's just a certain degree of, if all you're proud of is the flag, that's just, well, I'm proud because of the, you know, the patch of soil I was born on. I don't get it. I really, really don't. And I just cannot get my brain around that at all. So yeah, Nowhere Fast is a song around the political environment. It's about being effectively provincially shipwrecked, is what I wrote on my notes. The idea of being excluded from culture, from economic participation, being adrift effectively in a nation of madness. And you think about how the world, the UK at least, is certainly very, very focused on London being the only place that ever matters. House prices in London are the only thing that matters. Somewhere like Halifax, people never ever mention. You think about all the films that are set in Britain, they're all set in London, unless it's like the Full Monty or something. You don't get a film that's set in, I've not seen a film set in Bradford. I think maybe, unless it specifically makes Bradford being a plot point, you know, in the same way that when you watch a film, where it's set is mostly London or Chicago or New York or somewhere with tax breaks. You never think about, well, you know, what would Harry Met Sally been like if it was set in Newcastle, for example? Sure, the Americans would be laughing at the accents, but it would be a world that people would recognise. And this is where the cultural exclusion comes in. There's very, very few films that are set in worlds that I actually recognise that I live in. When I walked in Chicago and I was walking down the streets in Chicago or the streets in Oklahoma or Vegas or wherever, I kind of go, I'm in a movie. You know, that alleyway is in The Matrix. That alleyway over there is in, you know, Mad Max or something. You know, those type of conversations. Not Mad Max, because Mad Max is Australian. There's an element of walking down a street and thinking you're in a movie set. You walk down a street in Leeds, you don't think you're in a movie set unless the movie is Ben Wheatley's Sightseers, which, by the way, is an amazing movie and I recommend it highly. But you just kind of feel excluded from the conversation as if the world is something that's happening somewhere else. And then there's the whole of that song, I think, really feels like going, well, why royals? Why am I bothered about the royals? Why should I care about them? And the nature of society. So there's an element of economic violence that sits within there. Now, track, let's go, 7 is Well I Wonder, first appearing in a very slightly different mix on the B-side of How Soon Is Now. It is one of the greatest Smith songs, Well I Wonder. It's also, I think, one of the songs that the Smiths never played live. There's an early mix on the B-side of How Soon Is Now, and it quotes liberally from, again, the poem By Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept. Although, and as I've said, By Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept is a poem, it's actually a novel. It's in prose poetry form that came out in 1945. So you've got Morris's lyrics that move from autobiographical to observational, around seeing what other people's lives are like, and what's happening in those lives, and how do those look to people that are outside of those. And you can also clearly see as well that in the time when there was no money and lots of time, there was an awful lot of reading of books, an awful lot of living inside one's own head because the outside world wasn't satisfactory there. And then track 8 is Barbarism Begins at Home, which, as I've mentioned before, on the promotional 12-inch. There you are. Again, cover featuring Viv Nicholson, who is, according to the text on the back, before going to Malta on a later spending spree after tragedy had almost robbed her of what remained of her football pawn's fortune. There, and this was turned into a poster. I think it was a cover of a tour program as well. And right at the bottom, by the way, of the 12-inch, there's a little quote that says, "All God's children got wings," which you wouldn't necessarily think would go onto a Smiths cover, but there you are. And of course, there was a CD single of Barbarism Begins at Home. This backed with Shakespeare's Sister and Stretch Out and Wait. Here, when Rough Trade did a limited number of CD singles in about 1987, 1988, when the Smiths had ceased to exist. And again, sing once and then gone. Probably rare. I don't quite know, actually. I genuinely don't. and then we have the last track on the album, which is the title track, Meat is Murder, which is powerful when played live, or has been powerful when played live. I saw Morrissey play it live in 1999 and 2011. I had a very surreal experience of standing at the Hop Farm Festival in Paddock Woods, as Morrissey was singing Meat is Murder, and there's footage of abattoirs on the screens. And then just behind the screen was a fun fair, and it was like the lyric about and the calf that you carve with a smile, it is murder, and then like a fairground waltz just swinging in, and people screaming and yelling and having an amazing time, and then coming back again. It's one of the strangest juxtapositions of anything that I've seen in my life. Just the idea that in the midst of life we are in debt, etc., etc. That lyric around it's basically an audio version of Picasso's Guernica, an act or a work that is so horrific in its entirety, like a Darren Aronofsky film or maybe an Ari Aster film, that you almost are compelled by its beautiful awfulness, I think. That is Meat is Murder, the third or second and a half Smiths album. The 9 songs on it are steeped in institutional, organisational, emotional and actual violence. And to me, at least, it's an album that seems to be around and very clearly addressing the power struggle that comes from being younger and not knowing your place in the world, or not having the ability and power to control and define what happens around you. It's a great record, very underrated. Andy Rourke's bass lines are phenomenally good on some of these songs. Nowhere Fast, for example, Barbarism Begins at Home, even, Well I Wonder, some of the most gorgeous bass lines I've ever heard, actually, and I strongly recommend it as an LP. Of course, that's only half the story. What happened next? Well, in February 1985, after the release of Meat is Murder, on the 18th of March came a non-album single recorded at Ridge Farm in Surrey, January 1985, Shakespeare's Sister. Here is the 7-inch Rough Trade 181, and again, side 1, 2 minutes 9 seconds, side 2, 2 minutes 40 seconds. The whole thing ran less than 5 minutes. And it was engineered by Stephen Street, who the band had started working with on Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, but obviously became a more cohesive and more important member of the Smiths and Morrissey's story later on. There was also a 12-inch. Again, this photograph here, by the way, is of Pat Phoenix. Pat Phoenix, the cover is taken from her private archive on the set of Coronation Street. This is the one with the inner sleeve. So there's the black and white version of it, and then on the rear there is an illustrated discography guide to the Smiths, which makes sure that we have the Terence Stamp version of What Difference Does It Make. There's no reference to the New York remix of This Charming Man. There's no reference to the alternate cover for William It Was Really Nothing, which may not have existed at that point. Lovely little package. And on the 12-inch we had a bonus track, which is What She Said, which you will have heard from the album Meat is Murder. So 6 weeks after the album came out, there was another single. So you could easily be forgiven for thinking of Shakespeares Sister as not being a standalone single, but just something that was taken out from the Meat is Murder period and made a single in its own right. It did a little bit better in the charts, and That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. We had the Headmaster Ritual was released in the Netherlands in July 1985. Hello, I had the Headmaster Ritual. There's a kid bestowing violence upon what could be an adult, so effectively an inversion of the song's lyrical themes. And then That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which of course featured live tracks recorded at the Oxford Apollo on the 18th of March 1985. There was also a 7-inch single that was given away free with copies of The NME on May 1985, which featured What She Said live in Oxford, 18th of March, and also a track by those Irish pop band you may have heard of, the U2s there. So effectively 5 songs from Oxford were released. The band were touring They played a number of shows. The Oxford Apollo show was broadcast on radio. It was a bootleg CD called James Dean is Dead. It says it's broadcast live Manchester, 1985. Rubbish, it isn't. It's broadcast in Oxford. And a total playing time of 44 minutes 35 seconds there. There's also a different version of the Oxford performance on this bootleg box set, Songs That Changed Your Life. I strongly recommend this, as it has lots and lots of material in there, but it also includes a longer and expanded version of the Oxford Apollo Theatre show, which features, amongst other things, You've Got Everything Now, and a number of other songs, as well as some BBC demos. And again, they seem to have paid attention to the cover, because the art is pretty good actually on this release. It looks like that could have been a Smiths cover, doesn't it? It really does. As indeed does this one, although there all seem to be pictures of women. And there's a booklet there that goes with it. So Oxford Apollo 1985 is the nearest thing to an official live release. There was also a show in Madrid, and the show in Madrid is featured on the DVD that goes inside here, that was broadcast on Spanish television on the 18th of May 1985. It also made it onto this bootleg LP, Spanish Sun, which features How Soon Is Now, Handsome Devil, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, Shakespeare's Sister, Rusholme Ruffians, Hand in Glove, Meat is Murder, Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, Miserable Lie, and Barbarism Begins at Home. By the time this period came to a close, which was June 1985, there were rumours that the Smiths were thinking about leaving Rough Trade. They were unhappy with Rough Trade's performance, and on the 27th of July, there were rumours that the Smiths were entertaining deals from other labels. That says, on the 28th of July 1985, the band recorded The Boy with a Thorn in His Side for their next album, which is where we pick up the Smith story in future. So, I'm going to wrap up. I think it's probably the best thing to do. I think Meat is Murder is a very underrated release, actually. It's been kind of just glossed over as just, a thing the Smiths did, as opposed to anything else, as an LP, because it's right in the middle of everything else, and the band worked very, very quickly. There's no real sense that the band gave the songs the time that they really needed. So we had Barbarism Begins at Home, we had the album Meat is Murder, the Headmaster Ritual, Shakespeare's Sister, and that is the Smiths' Meat is Murder. Do you know what? You know what all these look like. I'm not going to bother showing them in front of yourself. So I'm away for a few days now, and there's not going to be an update for a while. Hopefully it's not been too tedious. Look after yourselves and each other, as the late great Jerry Springer would have said. Stay beautiful, and I'll see you all soon. Okay, bye.